Hi, folks. Welcome to the webinar. As was mentioned, my name is Chris Gardner. I'm a VP and Research Director here at Forrester, and I'm responsible for the team that's basically involved with software development and delivery. All things about it, creation, design, testing, deployment, all the various pieces. And I'm joined here by one of my teammates, Andrew Cornwall. Andrew, can you give yourself a brief introduction, please?
Sure. I am Andrew Cornwall. I am a senior analyst at Forrester. I've been focusing on front ends, particularly mobile front ends, but also developer experience and what it means to be on a development team. That's been my role at Forrester. And yeah, looking forward to the conversation today.
All right. Awesome. So we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, today's agenda is to go over our predictions. We published a report recently about our 2024 software development predictions. And these are the summary of these predictions, but this webinar is going to go into a lot more detail about what they're all about. So the prediction summary is about Turing bots improving software development. We're going to talk about what a Turing bot is exactly and how it's going to improve the life cycle, not just coding. We're going to talk about a jar source. We're going to explain what a jar source is. Hint, it's close to open source, but not quite, and why that we're moving towards that. We're going to talk about Backstage, a popular platform for self-delivery of resources for developers, and why we think it's going to take over in 2024. We're going to talk about improved developer experience in the top 5. We're going to explain what developer experience is and then go into exactly what top 5 means in this case. We're going to talk about Dora, the Google metrics for DevOps, and how we believe in 2024 we're going to be going beyond Dora as a sign of maturity. And then when we have one last bonus prediction, one prediction that didn't make the report, but we're going to be talking it through and explaining exactly where we stand in terms of APIs and their use in Fusion teams. So we'll be talking about that shortly. Okay, next slide, please. So Turing bots. What is a Turing bot? Well, several years ago, we coined the term to describe AI-enabled software development. That's a Turing bot. You could think of the classic example as GitHub Copilot. Since then, though, the category has exploded. It's gone way beyond coding. It's everything from design to testing to delivery, dev insights to analysis, planning planning, and each of these have their own set of Turing bots, essentially. Last year, we predicted that 10% of worldwide code would be written by Turing bots, and quite frankly, we were too conservative. We've seen Turing bot adoption grow much faster than anticipated. The next step will be to embed Turing bots into the SDLC and from beginning to end. And we're already starting to see this happen in some Turing bots that are on the market today. So next slide, please. So the efficiency gains in bringing Turing bots to the entire SDLC will be stark. Coders are going to go from, on average, will move 20 to 50% faster than they are today. Mark Burnett is somebody we talked to. He's the head of technology innovation at G Research, a UK financial tech organization. And he claims to have seen productivity go up to 200% and more when experienced engineers use Turing bots to work with languages or libraries outside of their normal development. But we're not just seeing Turing bots involved in coding. Testers will see gains of improvement of 15 to 20%, and product teams will gain 10% in terms of efficiency. Probably most telling, though, is that it's not just one segment of coding that'll benefit. Low code, which is building applications through abstracted models, will also see a benefit. And high code, programming with traditional languages like C, C++, Java, etc., will also see a benefit. So pretty much any coding methodology will benefit from Turing bots. One of the questions we get asked is, do Turing bots help developers? They help developers when writing code, but developers do a lot more than just writing code? Will Turing bots help outside of writing code? And the answer is yes, absolutely. For debugging, for understanding code, for looking up ways to do things, Developers will be using the IDE more and the browser less as a result. And there's still going to be a need to come up with design and talking it over with other developers. There's still a human element. Turing bots doesn't replace humans, they augment them. So just so people are not so worried that you're not going to get replaced by a Turing bot if you're a developer or if your teams have developers, but they will be increasingly leveraging Turing bots to deliver content going forward and deliver great applications and great application experiences. And then we turn to a jar source. Andrew.
Yeah, and as Chris said, a jar source, well, it looks kind of like open source, but it's not fully open. Until recently, there has been a pretty common model of delivering commercial software, especially from startups. A company is going to release a product as open source, use that to build a community, give customers a feeling of confidence. If you have open source software, you can rationalize using it because, hey, you've got the source. You can always, if the company decides to go do something you don't like, make use of what you have. It also makes it easier if you're a developer to start playing with it. You don't have to whip out the corporate credit card or agree to some kind of weird license agreement. You can just start taking a look at that. Most companies these days have a way to make use of open source software already. And you can just kind of start using it. The onboarding process for new software is easier. Uh, it's after that, the company that released the open source product, they need to know how to, well, they want to make money. So what would they do? Well, they've got this open source core of open source product. Sometimes it's a core. And they will then sell services, or they will provide the product as a service. They have an advantage there, a natural advantage that they're defining the roadmap, so they know what's coming before their competitors do. I mentioned open core. Some companies have an open core model where there's a core of open source, and then there are add-ons or third-party products that they can sell to fund the use of the open source core. For instance, one of those was Cypress. They had they still have a open core of testing framework, and then the testing dashboard that they provided that was free lets users have limited parallelization, limited test recording, and then they sell a dashboard that has fully featured test recording and fully featured parallelization. Cloud computing, though, it introduced a problem. Open source companies moved to the cloud. That was fine. They were, building their open source product in a container at, AWS or Amazon or Azure or GCP. They could sell that as a service, but it doesn't take much to become a competitor of one of these companies. They're spinning up an AWS container. I can spin up an AWS container, and now I can compete with that open source company. I lose a little bit. I don't have the visibility of the roadmap that the open source company does, but I gain quite a bit. I don't have to pay salaries for open source developers. I don't have to have someone doing the innovation. I can have the open source company do that for me. Even Open Core was this way. Cypress, they provided that dashboard that limited the amount of testing of parallelization and test recording that you could do. Someone just came out with a product called Sorry Cypress, and that has an unlimited dashboard and a ability to do test recording. So there's a problem when you have an open source license. You can't retroactively change the license. If you released something under a license that said everyone can copy this code, everyone can copy that code, and you just have to grit your teeth and bear it when people copy your code. Now, some companies, HashiCorp has done this most recently, decide after a period of time, we really don't want everyone copying our code. We'd rather have a more closed license that has more restrictions on it. Now, HashiCorp did a kind of crummy job at communicating this, so they made the problem worse for themselves. But underlying that was the fact that people had, under the existing license, rights to do things. And one of those things was to make a copy of that code. And when HashiCorp moved to a more restrictive license, people took advantage of the less restrictive license under previous versions and forked the code and then started out building it on their own, which is why we have OpenTofu and the interesting things that we have going on with Terraform today. We're also seeing large projects get released by larger companies under licenses that the OSI, the Open Source Initiative, doesn't think are strictly open source licenses. Llama 2 got released fairly recently with a license that Meta called open, but the OSI would not call open, which is essentially an open source license, except if you have more than 700 million customers in the past month, you have to apply to Meta for a different license. What that basically does is say, well, if you're Google or Apple or Amazon or another company that's providing services to a large number of people, you can't use Llama 2. I guess you could use Llama 2 and then make the calculation that you'd be able to get a license from Meta, but I think you would be risking a large chunk of your business if you did that. And honestly, I don't think it's too likely that Meta is going to give Google the rights to use Llama 2 in the same way that they'll give rights to a company of 30 people to use it. Around the same time, we heard from Red Hat, which was strictly speaking adhering to the terms of the GPL licenses that they are officially under. What they decided to do is they decided to provide the source code to their clients. And this is strictly speaking the terms of the GPL. So Red Hat is absolutely entitled to do this. But they kind of issued the implied threat. You can ask us for the source, but if you do that, we don't have to keep you as a customer. So you can ask, we'll give it to you. It's your right, but we may not renew your customer agreement after that. One strike and you're out, essentially. That's not exactly what most developers think of as open source these days. So although it is open source according to the terms of the GPL, certainly the spirit is different from the spirit of most open source projects. So we see a couple of free trends happening simultaneously around open source. Particularly with cloud computing, there are going to be a lot fewer businesses using open source as a startup model. Release the open source, build the community, and then sell the service. The cost of competition is just so much higher than it was. And we're going to see more of the OpenTofu and OpenELA kind of licenses for projects that started as open source and then went to a business license. I think I saw IBM had released a fork of Vault, or was going to release a fork of Vault under a license they called OpenBow, which that happened a couple of days ago. We're going to see more models like the Red Hat model of the GPL. We'll give you the source if you ask, but then you're no longer our customer. I think that sort of not even necessarily stated threat, but implied threat will certainly deter a lot of organizations from asking for the open source license source code. And then we're going to see more business licenses, like the Llama 2 license, like MariaDB's business source license, that have carve-outs for businesses to explicitly allow for the use of restricting the open source product if you're going to compete with the company that is going to provide the open source software. You know, some there will be a question then, well, if it's no longer really open source, how can I use it? How can I convince my business to use it? And I think there are a couple of techniques there. One is to provide a rolling open source license. So when version 4.0 comes out, version 1.0 goes open source. That gives people the feeling that, okay, eventually this is going to become open source so I can use it. Another is, part of the license can say, if this business disappears, it becomes open source. That, again, eliminates some of the risks that businesses feel. They're going to understand that there is an option. If the company just goes belly up, you have an open source product, so you won't be suffering the same way. I think in a cloud-based world, the liability of an open source license is starting to exceed the benefits, at least in many cases. That doesn't mean open source is going away. We're still going to see passion projects. We're still going to see code that people are sick of maintaining. But I don't think we're going to see the model of startup creates an open source project, builds a community, and then monetizes it by hosting it in the cloud. Now, people ask, what about open source being used for developing large language models? Right now, I don't think there's any open source license that I'm aware of that anticipated that the source code might be used in that way. The biggest gap there, I think, is contributors didn't think about the fact that that could happen. Now that it can, is that going to have a huge effect on contributions to open source products? I don't think so. I think what we're going to see instead, when you're contributing to an open source project, you're doing that because you're scratching an itch. There's a problem that you'd like to have solved. So you contribute the code, and then the problem gets solved, and you're happy. There may be adjustments to some of the open source licenses. We saw something kind of similar when DLLs came around, and GPL, under its original GPL 1.0, wasn't compatible with dynamic loaded libraries that were available. In fact, it explicitly forbid linking in. So I think that there may be adjustments to some of the licenses, the open source licenses, but honestly, I'd be surprised if there were significant adjustments. I think most of the time, open source is going to be continuing to use, is going to be continuing on the way it has been up till now with respect to contributions. People will now kind of expect that you would have an open source license. When you contribute to a product or a project, it's going to be used, or it could be used for building an LLM.
All right. So I know we only have a half hour, so I'm going to speed things up a bit. Backstage. So our prediction is that Backstage is going to become the predominant framework for self-service developer portals. So what is Backstage? It's a portal that was started by Spotify, released as open source. It's been donated to the CNCF, and it's designed to allow developers to self-serve. Rather than asking an operations team, please spin up an AWS instance of blank, by creating a ticket and then waiting for the team to get around to it, developers can go to Backstage and spin it up themselves without additional intervention. There's a danger in that, though. You don't want your developers spinning up random things with random components. So Backstage adds the ideas of guardrails and golden paths. So rather than spinning up a Kubernetes container with components picked at random, a platform team has defined a standard set of containers that they'll support. It also means the container you get will conform to corporate security policies. So by default, there should be fewer leaks due to misconfiguration. That doesn't mean you can't use another system if you want to. It just means you won't get platform team support if things go wrong. So along with these golden paths comes a need for discoverability. The golden path for an IoT application is probably different than a web application, and Backstage allows you to see what options your organization's platform teams provide. Next slide, please. Backstage has, in addition to this, a few additional issues, which is moving to address. It's focused on developer experience, but that sometimes comes at the expense of operations experience. It's plugin based, but those plugins have to be manually integrated for now. And a few vendors provide automation for rebuilding Backstage with new plugins. VMware Tanzu is one of them. Since then, Spotify has released its declarative integration, which simplifies plugin management, has plans for a plugin marketplace, and solutions for front-end plugins. Role-based access control is a premium plugin from Spotify, right now not part of the open source framework, although it probably will be soon. Backstage isn't the only developer portal game in town. Competitors like Harness and Atlassian Compass provide different frameworks that alleviate some of the plugin pain and add features. However, among enterprise developers at least, Backstage is leading a community in plugin development. In October, Spotify announced they'd grown from about 250 companies adopting it in September of last year to 2,200 companies in September of this year. We expect it to continue to grow as more platforms teams look for their self-service solution for deployment. And a question we often get is, how small is too small to adopt Backstage, or what is the right size in order of my company in order to adopt Backstage? And the Backstage fact file says any size company can benefit, but if you don't have continuous integration and you don't have continuous deployment, you got to start there before thinking about Backstage. Similarly, if you got a DevOps person or a small team that's already struggling just to keep up with requests, they're not going to have the bandwidth to implement Backstage on top of what they're already doing. A lot of organizations have done the lift and shift to cloud, but not evolved to have so many services that they need a catalog to discover them. So if all your APIs fit on a single wiki or Swagger page, even if you have to scroll a little bit, you probably don't need Backstage just yet. When you got multiple teams deploying to the cloud, when it's too heavyweight for DevOps to review instances individually, when you need golden paths to guide developers instead, that's when the value comes out. The next slide, we'll talk about developer experience.
Yeah, and I'll take your hint, Chris. Sorry about that.
No problem.
But yes, what we see is that developer experience is going to be among the top 5 investments in developer teams that organizations make. Even though we've seen huge layoffs, it's still not easy to find developers that you need to do the things that you want to do. Part of the reason for this is developers talk to each other. If you have an organization that is got a reputation as a sweatshop, you're not going to get the developers you want to hire. They're going to go somewhere where developers are valued more highly. You're going to struggle with burnout. You're going to struggle with retention. Smarter organizations, they recognize this. They've done that for a long time, but I think it's filtering down through the industry. Developer experience is being recognized as being important. I talk to people who want to know, how do I improve the lives of my software developers? It's not the 2000s thing of buy them a pool table and give them free drinks, although free drinks can't hurt. Often when people ask, they want to focus on productivity. How do I make my developers deliver more, deliver faster, deliver with higher quality? It seems like a good developer experience is correlated with productive developers, but that's not the only reason to be paying attention to developer experience. It's also the effect that it has. It seems like there's a strong correlation of developer experience with user-centered products. So what you're delivering to the end customer, that the business value is higher when you have a higher developer experience. People talk about developer experience with respect to tools all the time, and tools is one of the 5 things that I segment developer experience by, but it's not the only one. Tools are important, and developers appreciate good tools, but they've lived with bad tools for quite a while, and they aren't surprised when they see bad tools or tools that are hard to use or tools that are difficult. But beyond tools, there's architecture. How easy is it to add to the system? How much tech debt is there? How modular is the underlying system? If something's painful to add new code to, well, that's when you get pushback when you ask for new features. Processes. I break that down into 2 groups. There's team processes and organizational processes. They have a big effect on developer experience, and I would argue maybe even bigger than tools do. If you've automated your processes, if you're delivering small changes to the code base frequently, your team is going to be happier as well as more productive than if you are doing things manually and delivering huge batches that take days to review. Organizational processes, they're I think one of the big things is global rules that don't allow exemptions. As a mobile developer, one of the ones that I always hated was the rule that we're going to disable USB ports on all devices. There's a good reason for that rule. You don't want things to just go wandering off, but my phone has a USB port on it, and if I want to develop for my phone, I really want to be able to plug my phone into my laptop. Then there's metrics. I think we everybody knows that stack ranking is a horrible idea. I'm going to keep saying that until everyone says yes to me. But stack ranking was the technique where you rank all the developers on a team and then fire the bottom 10%. What that did was just get all developers putting all developers in competition with each other. And I like to use the analogy of a team. If you're a hockey team, you're not going to measure everyone by shots on goal and then fire the goalie because the goalie didn't have enough shots on goal. So metrics can make or break a team's developer experience. And then finally, there's culture. And again, here, I kind of separate it into 2 groups. There's the team culture and organizational culture. Team cultures are where the first line managers can have the biggest effect. If you've got half the team that's wanting to deliver through the fastest that they possibly can, we're just going to get the prototype out the door, and you've got half the team that's focused on we want to deliver the highest quality product we can, you've got to align these norms before you can have a happy team. And then organizationally, this is where the middle managers and executives have the highest effect. The I think the Google 2023 State of DevOps report had a good discussion on this. They align people using a Westrom's taxonomy of organizational cultures, where you have pathological cultures that are essentially based on fear. They want to destroy new ideas, kill the messenger. Bureaucratic cultures, which are based on the rule book. Again, there's a little bit more cooperation, but new ideas are seen as rocking the boat, and we'd have to update the rule book for that, so we probably don't want to do that. And then generational cultures, which are embracing new ideas, learning, developing guardrails to protect ourselves if we run into something that causes a problem. And Google reported that companies with a generational culture were about 30% more than other companies in terms of team productivity. Sorry, generative culture, not generation. developers want to develop software. Um, they like doing that. So companies need to, well, the smart companies are recognizing that if you can keep them happy, if they feel like they're making a difference, that pays off for the company as well. Uh, you know, people ask about sometimes developer experience and customer experience being at odds. And I think sometimes that's the case. Sometimes there are frameworks that are really a joy to develop in, but you're downloading several megabytes of code to your browser when you make use of it. So users don't have as good an experience as developers do. I think there are other places where operations people, if you've got something like Backstage, uh, if you're making it really easy for your developers to do development, you have to worry about the poor ops people who are maintaining these products. Uh, so I think there needs to be a tension between all three. Customer experience, developer experience, and operational experience. But I do think that organizations see developer experience as important, and they're going to be investing more in that in the future.
Awesome. So Google and Dora metrics. Our predictions that businesses, our fifth prediction rather, and the last one in our report will be that businesses will explore beyond the four core Google Dora metrics as a sign of DevOps maturity. The work on Dora came out of Google, the DevOps Research and Assessment Group, and they settled on four metrics. Two measure throughput. One is deployment frequency and how often you deploy. The fastest people deployed on demand, and the slowest on average were somewhere between a week and a month. And then the other throughput metric was lead time for changes. During the normal course of development, how long does it take to get from code commit to deploy to production? And in 2023, the highest performers were under an hour, while low performers were between a week and a month. Two other metrics that Dora focuses on is quality and stability. Failed deployment recovery time. Originally, this was called mean time to recovery, but got renamed to exclude things outside your control. If there's a bad deployment, how long does it take to restore service? High performers were within an hour. Low performers might take up to 6 months to get back up and running. And then lastly, change failure rate. What percent of time do fixes not actually fix the problem? They break something. They need to be rolled back. They need another patch to fix. The best performers average around 8% of the time. Others were up to 64% of the time. So 2 out of 3 fixes were no good. Vendors who collect metrics are glad to have things like Dora because it gives them an automated way to determine how well your team is delivering. You don't need to bother with surveys. You can get most of the data by tagging defects and querying the defects database in the Git repo is a means to capture this data. Next slide, please. So what's wrong with Dora? Well, nothing really, as long as you're not relying on it alone. You get some useful insights out of Dora, and if your team is focusing on things like delivery, reliability, and speed, but improving any of the Dora metrics will make your team more efficient at software delivery. The thing is, the metrics are backwards looking. They only tell you how you were, and if you make a change, you might be able to get an idea of whether that change was the cause of improvement, but they won't warn you if you're running into problems. There's been a tendency to use Dora metrics to classify teams as elite, high, medium, and low performers, and that can be inappropriate. You won't expect developers who are working on, say, a new embedded device with flaky hardware in a regulated industry to have the same delivery capability as teams that are doing routine delivery of a well-understood web app. A mandate from the top that all of our teams must be elite is really discouraging for a team who can never get there because of the nature of their domain. Conversely, if you're delivering 2 times a day already, is it worth it to go for on-demand releases? One of Dora's advantages that you don't need to talk to developers is a disadvantage, obviously, as well. There are better metrics out there that focus on these things called Space and DevX that include asking developers what they think through routine or pop-up surveys. Space includes factors for satisfaction and collaboration, while DevX focuses on cognitive load, feedback loops, and flow. Dora will tell you how quickly things are being cranked out, but can't tell you if your team is healthy or burning out. Finally, Dora measures how good you are delivering software, but delivering software shouldn't be the goal of product teams. Dora measures how fast your car can go, but it doesn't matter if you're driving the wrong way. Because of what Dora fails to capture, we expect that as organizations mature, they won't eliminate Dora, but will start looking beyond it to measure things that along the lines of how well the team is performing, ultimately if the work is meeting a business need and not just getting things done quickly. And one of the questions we get asked is, when does it sense to start thinking beyond Dora? Don't think there's any bad time to start thinking about going beyond it. If your only problems are with delivery frequency and quality, then maybe Dora covers all you need. But if you find yourself having troubles with business alignment, collaboration, cost, or developer burnout, then it makes sense to add the metrics for those as well. There's a great Forrester report that you can download called Development Metrics That Really Matter that can help you in that regard. And our final slide, our bonus prediction. Andrew, do you want to take this?
Sure. This is one of those things. What didn't make it into this year's report? Well, one was a prediction that 20% of organizations will have Fusion API development teams. APIs are the things that bring together digital commerce initiatives. We've seen business leaders take an increased interest in APIs. Last year, we predicted that enterprise business leaders, not IT, would drive more than 40% of API strategies. This year, we've seen more grassroots efforts to enable APIs as a business strategy. The bonus prediction for this year is by the end of 2024, 20% of organizations will have Fusion API development teams. And what we mean by that is a cross-functional product team of business and technology professionals that reports to the business unit as opposed to IT for defining and creating APIs. These teams are going to have faster iteration, superior alignment of APIs to their business objectives. This is it's a tricky problem. It requires that you have a pretty sophisticated foundation for your API strategy. But as more organizations achieve that sophistication, I think they're going to adopt a Fusion team model, just focusing on business alignment with APIs.
Yeah, and the counterpoint to this, I don't disagree that we're going to see this, but to say that 1 in every 5 teams will have it by next year seems like a bit of a stretch, and it's one of the reasons that we didn't put it in the report. We'll see this in the future, but there's going to be resistance. Getting all the stakeholders together on one call is complicated enough. So there are still organizations, especially outside the technology industry, who see software as a cost center rather than a competitive advantage. They're going to take a while to get out of that rut. Next slide, please. With that, we're closed out. We actually we have 1 minute for questions. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to enter them into the chat and we'll see if we can tackle them.
I'm not seeing any questions in the chat currently, but if there are any questions that come up after the webinar, you can always feel free to email Chris or Andrew. And this concludes today's webinar. Thank you so much to you both for your insights and your presentation today. And thank you to our audience for your participation and your attendance. And we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.